But the view we're going to discuss today, or at least eventually when we get past Descartes, is actually even weirder than that, or idealism. I'm talking about Barrett here. She's arguing for something. She denies she's an idealist, but the bottom line of what falls out of her discussion does fit most closely with the traditional idealism. She's not a traditional realist, but we'll get into that in a moment. Okay, right now I want to get started, and thanks to everyone who's here, and I hope you can hear me. If you can't, let me know. All right. For the new people here, what I usually do is I begin a short presentation. I break it up into parts. First, I'm going to talk about the historical aspect of this, about Descartes and Princess Elizabeth, because that's the beginning of at least in the Western philosophy of the mind-body problem. And then the second part, we're going to switch gears to talk about a contemporary view of this matter from a neuroscientist who also dabbles in philosophy of science and psychology, and who happens to be, at least in the literature, one of the most highly cited neuroscientists in the world. Her view is very controversial, but it's making waves, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, because in a way she tries to offer an interesting alternative answer to a lot of the traditional responses to the mind-body problem. That's why that's where we're focused on the second part of this. And but before we do that, let's see what else. Yeah, I think that's enough introductory. Again, welcome to the new people. And what I usually do is I'm going to do talk a little bit about Descartes and Princess Elizabeth's criticism of Descartes, and then we're going to talk about that. Then we'll open it up to discussion then for that part, and then we'll switch to talk about Lisa Feldman Barrett's views, which are very interesting. And then we'll have a discussion about that. Also, toward the end there, I want to try, I took those of you those lectures that I put up there, I don't know how many of you got a chance to see them. They're rather long. Each one is about 2 hours long, and there's 3 of them, so we're talking about 6 hours. And they're usually the first hour is usually her lecturing about the topic, and the second hour is she fields questions, or it's a Q&A. And some of those questions are very, very interesting, and 2 or 3 of them are philosophically relevant that I took those clips out, and then toward the end I'm going to play those clips. They're all under 6 or 8 minutes, so we can talk about them, because she's challenged during those Q&As, and her response is very interesting. That's why that's where we're going to end up with. So first, the mind-body problem in Descartes, and for those of you who don't already know this, I mean, Descartes was an important philosopher of the 17th century. I think he was, I think it was in the 1740s when he wrote the Meditations, which is probably his most important work, because it's still read in introductory philosophy classes, and it's a starting point to talk about the mind and body and their interaction, because he had a metaphysics where he tried to describe what his project in the meditation was, to figure out what we can know for certain, for absolute certain. And in a way, this is the beginning of modern science, because he actually laid down some of the ground rules for what would later become the attitude or the philosophy of science, where you were supposed to hold your opinions in abeyance until you look at the world and ask yourself, what do you really know and what do you just believe, and sort it out. That's what he was trying to do in the Meditations. And he started out by first doubting everything. Just like if you're looking for a rotten apple in a barrel of apples, one procedure is you could dump them all out and then put back only the good ones to sort out the good from the bad. That was sort of an analogy to describe how he approached things. So he started out in the Meditations by saying, I don't know anything, but I'm going to go through all the things which I used to think I knew, look at them carefully, and see if I still if I really know them. And if they're not, I'm going to leave them outside the barrel and only put back the good ones. So assuming you know nothing, which is how he starts, let's take what the common sense view of what we know, that we know the stuff at the edge of our senses, the stuff we can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. Do we really know that? And it's important to keep in mind that Descartes wasn't talking about, do you probably know it? Is it likely that it's true? No, he was interested in absolute certainty. Is there no way on earth you could be wrong about this, about what you see, hear, taste, and touch, and smell, and so forth? And he said, yeah, there are lots of ways. I mean, we could be dreaming, this famous dream argument. We could be under the influence. In modern times, there was a famous movie. It's also brought up in the context of this, The Matrix. If any of you have ever seen it, it's about people who think they're real, but in fact they're living in a world that's created by some mad scientist or mad group of people, or people that are or beings that are vastly more capable of making a virtual reality that we live in and believe it's real. Can we be absolutely certain that isn't the case? And Descartes' phrase, obviously he wasn't thinking about this science fiction scenario. He had in mind, suppose there was an evil demon out there, a godlike being who was all powerful, could do anything they wanted to do. They were all omniscient, all knowing. But they weren't all good, like the traditional Christian God. They, in fact, were evil. They wanted us to think that we were living in a real world, but it was all made up. How could we be sure there isn't such an evil demon around? Could we be certain? They would have the power to create all the experiences that we are having, but they don't correspond to any reality. They're just making it up for us, for the hell of it, or whatever motivation they might have. But it isn't that but they're making us, putting us in a position to believe that we're living in a real world, but in fact we're not. He called this evil genius, this guy an evil genius or an evil demon, depending on which source you read. But how could we be sure that we're not in that situation? That was his question. And it throws into doubt all the sensory information that we think we have, because that, in principle, at least logically, could be not real. And there's no way on earth that we could somehow step outside this, because every piece of evidence, everything we would point to as counter evidence would itself be part of the picture, the story we're being fed. Anyway, to cut a long story short, in the Meditations, in the end, Descartes feels, well, he does think there are a few things that are not subject to that we're not subject to being deceived about. And it's not the stuff you can touch, taste, and feel, and see, and so forth. He thought that there were certain ideas that are just, by their very nature, are not dependent upon anything in the real world, and yet in mind specifically mathematics, because not physics, but mathematics, because it doesn't rely on there being anything in the real world to correspond with it. And pure logic, for example. And in the end, he comes up with, okay, but before he gets to that last point, this is his most famous point that he makes in the Meditations. He thinks, well, I could be wrong about everything, but there is one thing, he thinks, that I cannot be wrong about. Even if I was deceived by an evil demon or evil genius or in a Matrix type situation, I would have to exist at least as the object of deception. In other words, as a thinking thing. I believe I'm here. I may not really be here, but at least I'm here to believe it. I may be at the receiving end of a deception, but I have to exist in order to be deceived, right? You can't deceive a nothing. The very fact that I could be, that I am here thinking these thoughts, of that I'm certain. I don't know about my body or anything else in the world or other people, but I know that I'm here as a conscious being who's thinking about these matters, imagining things. Whether they're true or not, I don't know, but I'm here at least thinking about them. And even if I'm being deceived about everything else, at the very least, you are there at the receiving end of a deception, which requires that you be there. That's the famous "I think, therefore I am" claim that Descartes makes. So that's the certainty that Descartes arrives at. He says, even if I'm wrong about everything else, at least I'm certain about that I'm here as a thinking thing, as he puts it. But in the end, Descartes is not really a hardcore skeptic. He really wants to find a reason to believe everything else that we think is true is really true, that there really is an outside world out there. But how can he show it, given that he just threw into doubt all that sensory information? And this is where he gets into, we're not going to follow him in that direction, but just so you know where he ends this, is he thinks that there's, he was a mathematician. He invented coordinate geometry and made many advancements in the science of his time. So he had a great respect for pure logic and reasoning, and he basically, he didn't invent this proof, by the way, but he articulated it pretty well. It's sometimes called the ontological argument for the existence of God. His view is this: that if God under the traditional Christian description is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, he says, by definition, God has all the perfections. Everything that is the ultimate, that's perfect, God's got it. Okay? So how could there not be a God that didn't also possess existence? That is, God would have to exist if he's truly perfect. If he's missing existence, then he isn't God. You're not talking about God. You're talking about something else. In the same way, you can take a triangle and define a triangle as a figure with three sides and whose angles all add up to, 180 degrees, I believe. But that's the very definition of a triangle. If you have something that fits that definition, it is a triangle. And it's not dependent upon there being real triangles that are perfect triangles in the real world. It's just a concept, an idea. Well, the concept of God, according to Descartes, included those three things: all omniscience, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence, are all good, all powerful, and all knowing. Such a being could not possibly not exist, because that would make them imperfect, and by definition is perfect. Like a triangle that didn't have three angles, it just wouldn't be a triangle. So he uses to prove that God does exist, to his satisfaction anyway. He didn't invent this. He actually picked it up from a medieval philosopher before him. But whether you buy this argument or not, most modern philosophers don't. But the way he used it is that he used it to show that there's a very high probability, or not beyond probability, that the real world, the world out there, the physical world, the world at the edge of your senses, really is there. It's really there because a God of the sort he just described, an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God, would not be motivated to deceive you about such a grand deception. Would not be part of his agenda. It might be that of an evil demon, but not of this traditional Christian God, under that description, that is. And not only that, but a God of that who fits that description would not permit there to be an evil demon, a grand who could pull off a grand deception of this. So, what does that conclude? From that, what does he conclude? He concludes that for the most part, when we look at the real world and we trust our senses, we are, in fact, rational to do so. That doesn't mean that we are always right in what we see, hear, touch, taste. We can be deceived, but that deception is not a deception coming from elsewhere. It comes from the fact that we're imperfect, that our senses are not always accurate. And that's a flaw in us, but not in the world or out there. So that from this he concludes that there probably is a real world out there with real things and objects, and what we think we perceive is probably there. Okay, because it would be a rather perverse God who would make us systematically wrong about all of it. Occasionally we're wrong, but that's our problem. It's our flaw, not the world's or God's. So that's his view. But Underneath that is a division he makes, a distinction he makes between the mind and body. Earlier he said, I think, therefore I am. He meant that the thing we're most certain about is our mind, the contents of our mind. Body is everything else, not just our own body, but everything else around it is part of the physical world, the world that includes the body. And these are two separate things. This is his metaphysics. And they both exist. We know about the mind. About that he's sure, because again, his famous quote, I think, therefore I am. As far as the body's concerned, you probably really do have a body, and there really are other bodies out there. But that's not quite on the same level as your own mind or your own your existence as a thinking thing, as he put it. About that, he said we have a clear and distinct idea of ourselves as a conscious entity. About everything else, it's a little fuzzy, and we have to rely on the fact that if you accept his proof of God, that a all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God would not permit us to be systematically deceived about all that stuff that we think is there, like other people, the world, the sun, the moon, the earth, so forth. Okay, so that's Descartes in a real brief summary of him. During his time, though, he had a contemporary, this is Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, who was known at the time as being a real intellectual, an important person by anyone who she contacted. She wasn't shy about writing to people that she thought were, she corresponded with the most intelligent and most movers and shakers in the world of ideas of her time. Many scientists she wrote to Leibniz, I believe, as well. She wrote him a letter, and they had a conversation that went on for 6 years, and the letters they wrote between them are very interesting. She challenged his view about the dualist idea, that there is this mind and this body. What she couldn't understand, and what she, I put some quotes from her letters in the extended write-up, by the way, so you can hear what she wrote. She basically asked him, how does the mind, does the mental and the physical interact, given the way you describe them, that the way Descartes described them. The mental for Descartes is non-extended, meaning it doesn't take up space. There's no like physical location for a belief or a memory or a thought in your head. Thinking, like logical inferences, mathematical things, don't take up physical space. You can't say where in the universe the number 2 is located, or where do you see triangles, real perfect triangles, not things that resemble them in the world. These things are not part of the physical extended world. Extended means it takes up space and time. The extended world is the world of the body. That in the extended world, things have properties, like they have colors, sounds, taste, touch, things that your senses can detect. That's where those are essential features of extended things. The essential feature of a mental thing is that it's not extended. So Princess Elizabeth asked him, how is it possible that these two things interact with each other? These two radically different things, as Descartes himself describes them, how can they interact with each other? We understand we can observe how physical things interact with each other, but how does a non-physical thing interact with a physical thing, or the reverse? If you really are a mental, not thinking thing that is not part of the physical world, how is it that you can be affected by or altered by something in the physical world? How can you have a sensation outside of you affect your mental world, given that they're such utterly different things, according to Descartes himself? And so they had this long conversation over several years about it. They talked about other things as well, but this was one of the most important ones. And Descartes, in the end, didn't really have a good answer to her on this. And this is why she's considered sometimes in a way the originator of the mind-body problem, because she brought it to the attention of Descartes that there's this big mystery. If you're going to say there are two kinds of things in the universe that have utterly different from each other, and yet you're saying they interact with each other in us because we're embodied minds. How does that interaction happen? Can you say anything about that? In the end, Descartes didn't seem to say basically that it was just a brute fact of the world that these two things interact. Exactly how the mechanism of how they could act, given that it's not physics, for example, deals with physical objects and how they interact with each other. Maybe pure reasoning or logic or mathematics deals with purely mental things, but there is the mechanism that explains how they interact with each other. He basically gave up and said, well, maybe science someday will figure that out, is where he left things pretty much. So that is a segue into, before I go into the next section here, into contemporary times, because at least some scientists nowadays think we do have a better understanding on what how the interaction between the mental and the physical works, or doesn't work, as the case may be. And so I'm going to pause in a moment so we can talk about this. But before switching to Barrett's view. But over the centuries, it's been over 3 centuries or more since the 17th century, there have been lots of philosophical responses to this mind-body problem. Some of them we probably have heard. The one view is what Descartes' own view was dualist. He's a dualist because he thinks there's two fundamentally different types of things in the world, the physical and the mental. The problem for him was explaining the interaction between them. And that's what Princess Elizabeth pointed out. And it's not all philosophers, or there's some that defend Descartes on that, but it's still a problem. But there have been other responses on the British empiricists, for example, especially I think George Berkeley, an Irish philosopher, one of the 3 main British empiricists, the other 2 being John Locke and David Hume, was an idealist. An idealist is someone who thinks, well, there aren't these two things. There's just one thing, and it's mental. The physical is a figment of our minds. Because every piece of information that gets into our consciousness has to pass through the mental, through our mind. And that's the only thing that we are certain. So he simply said that the things exist in a mind. His famous line is, to be is to be perceived. If something isn't being perceived in some way, it isn't being seen, touched, tasted, or smelled by anyone, it doesn't exist. Only what is there that's present to the mind, some mind or other. It could be a human mind, an animal mind, or in Berkeley's case, he said, because somebody asked, well, what you mean you're saying that if there's no one in your room and the stuff in there doesn't exist because no one's looking at it? Berkeley's response, he was a bishop, by the way, his response was, well, even when we're not there, or no mind is there perceiving it, God's mind is universal and has got the entire world in his mind, and that's why stuff is still there. It's like if you turn your head away from something and you turn back to look at it, it's still there. What happened? Well, it existed in a mind, even if it wasn't your mind, God's mind. That's pure idealism, in which everything exists only in the mind. And there are contemporary philosophers, and actually a surprisingly growing number of them, who think some version of that is true, though they don't introduce God into the picture. They simply think is that we have no way of checking out to see if there is a real world external to the mind without using the mind. We don't interact directly with an external world. We interact with the information that's entering our consciousness through one of our senses. And that's all we ever have access to. if there's regularity out there, and because people say that stuff doesn't appear and reappear every time I look at it, well, how can you prove that that's not true? How can you observe but in principle, step outside of your senses to check it out, to see if there really is a world there? There's no way to do that. So there's a logical rigor to idealism, which still is out there. It's a view that it isn't, at least in recent times, in the past century or so, the most popular view of this problem, but it is still there. And that's a monist view. Monist is the view that there is only one kind of thing in the world, unlike Descartes, who was a dualist. The other kind of monism is physicalist or materialist, which says, no, it's all material stuff. The stuff of physics, the physics studies, that's real, and everything else is composed of it or reducible to it. So the mental, they would say, a materialist would say, is just the brain. The brain is what, if it isn't, the mental has no independent existence of the brain. So if we knew all there was to know about the brain, then we'd know all there is to know about the mental as well, because there's no non-material stuff out there. That's monist of the physicalist or materialist variety. And that view is probably, I don't know if it's still the dominant view, but it definitely has been one of the major views in recent times, in the past century or so. So actually, this is a good place to pause and discuss this, or entertain any questions, or no one has to agree with anything I'm saying here. If you know something better, please speak up. And then after this discussion period, I'm going to go and talk about a contemporary view about this subject that I think is intriguing. Anyway, does anybody have any questions or thoughts or comments at this point? Go ahead and just speak up if you do.
Hello. Oh, did I raise my hand?
Go ahead and just talk if you want. I can hear you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for hosting, and I really appreciate your introduction and lecture part of this. So, yeah, actually, the question is, so there was the statement that is a quote saying, "Oh, making shit up." Yeah. So, in the sense as you explained it already. So, now my question would be, well, if that would be true and everything is made up, then just the idea of making something up is not invalidated per se. Because when I say that I made up something or someone made up something, then it's made up in comparison to some kind of base reality, right? But in the minute I say that everything is made up, even the person saying that anything is made up, then made up in itself loses its definition entirely. So if everything is made up, actually, then nothing is made up as well, or not?
Well, thanks for the question. We're gonna get into that when we get into Barrett's view. This is Descartes didn't think everything was made up. None of the philosophers of his period would have said that, and made up in the sense of just arbitrarily made up. Descartes thought there was reality out there. The reality is the mind, and the physical world for Descartes was also real. And the guarantee for that was not that we can prove that it's real, but that there is this God who's going to guarantee that what you think is real is probably real. So he was not someone who thought it was made up. Neither was Berkeley or the idealists. They think there is a reality out there. It's the mental. They just define reality to be the mental world if you're a Berkeley idealist. Or if you're Descartes, you define the real as being composed of two kinds of things, the physical and the mental. As far as the making up part, we're going to get into that when we get to Barrett's view. And I think it's a little bit more sophisticated than, well, like I said, we need to get into it to really discuss that. But just hold on, we'll get to that question. Does anybody have anything to say about what I've said so far? If not, we'll just move on. Go ahead. Monty, go ahead.
Yes, I'm more inclined to think we live in a monistic universe, that all cause and effect. Can you hear me?
Yeah, what kind of universe did you say?
Monism.
Monist, okay. A physicalist?
Yeah, basically, all cause and effects are connected with each other, and any effects that are not connected, well, we wouldn't know.
Yeah.
It'd be a separate universe.
By monist,
and so the only one we're interested with is the where we're connected to the all cause and effect from, like, for instance, the Big Bang to now. And surprisingly, even though the universe is like 90 billion miles wide, that we're still connected to it all, because when the Big Bang happened 13.6 billion years ago, we're seeing that ancient time. It took that many years for the light to get to us. And so we're seeing what it was 13.6 billion years ago. And as it ages, it will move away from us, and we'll continue to see that boundary. You know, what I call the horizon, the event horizon. Like a black hole is the event horizon, our universe is an event horizon.
Well, that sounds
mind is a separate thing in a sense that, it's dependent monistically on this universe, but yet it can be isolated and separate and a completely unique experience. And that evolution, experimenting with creating models of the outside universe and trying to make decisions with it. For instance, the first few nerve cells, you know, that light is bad. Light is the sun, it cooks you. When you are triggered, then you trigger muscles that cause you to move away from the light. And then ever so carefully, evolution built cell by cell, cells that be able to create more accurate models of the outside universe based on the information coming in. But the ideas and the model and the self, they're all kind of fiction, it's separate, and we're all kind of alone. We think we're not alone, but we really are, because we're just getting representations of the universe, not the real sense of the universe. So in a sense, the mind is separate, but yet it's dependent monistically on the physical universe. And it doesn't exist independently. The physical universe disappears, the mind disappears.
Okay, thanks, Monty. Actually, you're basically articulating the physicalist or materialist view of the matter, that there is just one kind of stuff, it's material stuff, and the mind arises right from that material stuff somehow or other, correct? But there isn't a mental world that is not reducible to the physical, right? Okay, that's the physicalist point of view. Well, Barrett will have something to say about that in a little while, but we'll get to that here. Gyro, or is it? Am I pronouncing that correct? You have your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, where am I? That's what I want to know. And I think I'm going to just try to say that I'm somewhere between a dualist and a monist. Like I'm a semi-monist. No, semi-dualist. No, somewhere in between. Or maybe I can move around back and forth depending on what's happening.
Yeah.
So that maybe when I'm dreaming, I'm definitely, I would say, an idealist in that everything that I am manufacturing in the dream, I'm identifying myself in the dream, acting out something, and all that is purely mental. But then when I wake up, then I'm thinking I'm still kind of identifying things, but then there's others that are doing the same thing that I'm aware of. That the others are doing the same thing I'm doing. So how did they get here? And so, but then there's things that are less, that seem to be more inert or material. So how did they, maybe they're like the electronics in a video game, they're just there to create this virtual reality, this simulation. So that's just their purpose.
Yeah.
So, thank you. But I liked your presentation. It was very good.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, you seem to be uncertain where you are at. You know, which is actually if you go to the history of the problem is there are philosophers on all sides of this issue. At different times in history, certain views or schools of thought have been more prominent than others, but it seems to go like, it's like the weather, it changes, depends all the time. As I said, in recent, I would say from the early first, at least since the middle of the 20th century up until fairly recently, physicalism was the dominant view. In the early 20th century, actually, a lot of scientists, including Einstein, and a lot of the quantum physicists would say, science doesn't study the physical world, they would say. It studies data, information. What's behind that data? It's not their business. Because science cannot get behind what the information it studies what's the information that our senses give us, either our senses in the raw sense or through instruments like telescopes, microscopes, and so forth. But we just have information, and we're trying to understand things based upon that data that we're getting. What's really out there? That's metaphysics. At least that's above and beyond what their pay grade, so to speak. They leave that to the philosophers. That's what the philosophers do. They do speculate about, well, I'm getting this information about what looks like an apple on my table. It's red. I touch it. I can bite it. It tastes like an apple. But is there really a thing there, or is it just information that my sensory apparatus is picking up about it? A scientist would say, well, if there is such a thing, we don't deal with it. We just deal with the information. We work with that, because that's all we have to work with. Which leaves open the question about what's really there. That's why this was still a problem, because in a way it goes beyond what science has access to. At least, well, so that's one view of it. Now, there are people who are pretty adamant that, as perhaps Monty, for example, that there's just one kind of stuff out there. It's physical. It's physics, and we'll explain it all eventually if we survive long enough to have the time to research it. That's all there is. Mike, go ahead. You got your hand up?
Yeah. Just a couple of remarks. I was thinking that seems like one of the easiest ways to prove the kind of illusory nature of mind is with the eye's blind spot. So like if I'm sitting down, laying down or something, and I look up at a light, and then I shift my eye a little bit, the light disappears, and the color where it once was is filled in with the color of the wall. So it's like that's like the easiest way I can come up with to kind of prove the mind has this illusory capacity. I just wanted to mention that. It's on my mind. It seems like a lot of this discussion centers around, well, as it probably should, the metaphysical aspect of mind versus body, which in a way we're getting into a syntax and semantics game. But to me, the most interesting thing is how the mind differs from Descartes' realm of extension. So I mean, in extension you have chemical and mechanical type interactions, but that's not really what's going on in the mind. And in the mind we have this incredible capacity to integrate multiple disparate concepts, and I don't see that equivalence really in Descartes' world of extension, except for that. I mean, like any object could be considered as a bunch of different concepts. But so I guess my point is that there is an emphasis on metaphysical status and to try to reduce everything to one thing. But to me, it always stems from the mind has such a different capacity that we don't really, it's not set up so that we can experience it. Some equivalence to that in material reality.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's.
Yeah, thanks. Monty, you have your hand up again? Go ahead.
Yes, Victor, I enjoyed your description that basically science only deals with data, and I think we're pattern recognition machines in that pattern. We basically look at the patterns and say, okay, I will extend that pattern and see if it's still correct. And when it is, it's okay, we have something. If we can predict what the future patterns might be, and we have a sense that we're not alone in this universe, that it's some big game where we're in a game of some kind and we're the only actor in it, that somehow the fact we can invent technology and the technology is reliable is because we count on patterns in our simulation, whatever you like to call it. And if the God's not playing games with us, that we decide to go with those patterns, the machine works. It indicates there's a shared reality between all of us, because we all share the same technology. So it's okay, there is a reality outside our mind. And the indirect evidence, I wouldn't call it direct, the indirect evidence is we recognize patterns, we create machines that take advantage of those patterns, and those machines keep working and working day in, day out, 98.5% of the time. Thank you.
Thanks. William, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of reading over the last couple of years about near-death experiences and like shared death experiences and that kind of thing, and it seems to be like on the fringe of science, but it's becoming more like an accepted thing. Do you think it brings anything helpful to the conversation, or do you have any thoughts on that regarding this topic?
Oh, you said about near-death experiences. What can you tell us what you're thinking of there? I mean, how is that supposed to?
Yeah, it's a lot of phenomena. Like they'll do these studies at hundreds of hospitals where they'll put a placard on like the top of a cabinet somewhere with the picture of an animal or whatever, something in a different room, and they've found that patients who are declared brain dead come back to after a few hours and report things that have happened in rooms adjacent to theirs, or reporting the pictures of those animals that they put on top of filing cabinets. And there's all these bizarre things they don't know how to explain.
Okay, so is that suggesting that maybe that like there's something like a soul or a spirit or something non-physical that can separate itself from the physical body, which is dead, and then go learn things and come back to the body and then say about what it learned? Is that the idea is here? Or
well, I don't. Yeah, in the context, or in this kind of conversation, I probably wouldn't jump to that conclusion, but it is interesting. It's like it's opening up a lot of questions, and
yeah. I mean, I've heard about that stuff too. I to the best of my knowledge, the problem with a lot of those accounts is that either in science, if you're really serious about science, you can't automatically dismiss stuff like that, but you can't really take it too seriously unless you're able to reproduce it pretty regularly. And
it would be very hard to find volunteers to try to test that theory.
Just kill some people to see if they have out-of-body experiences. On a mass scale, a reproducible experiments where we kill a lot of people and see which ones. It's unusual enough that unusual things are not things that science can really approach, unless it finds that they are the conditions or in which they can be reproduced at will. Then you're onto something that is not just. And I don't want to say that I don't think there's a lot of mystery that science doesn't get to, but I mean and even scientists themselves will admit to this. But you can't really study it scientifically unless you can reproduce it, and it can't be the one-of-a-kind type experiences. That doesn't automatically dismiss it, but it does. I don't know what you're going to learn about as far as the mind-body stuff about that. There are lots of people who believe in idealists, philosophers who are not believers that when you're dead, you're dead. But there is still such a thing as a non-physical thing called the mind. You don't have to believe in life after death or something like that and still be, and you can be an idealist and not believe in that because you just think that there is a genuine world of things that are not physical. that doesn't necessarily translate into something like a soul or a spirit that can survive you, or but they would want to point to non-physical things that are reproducible, that you can witness, that anybody can experience. For example, at least up to now, maybe science someday will be able to explain this, but suppose you're having a memory right now about something that happened to you when you were 10 years old. It wasn't anything remarkable. It doesn't alter your behavior. You don't tell anybody about this, but and then it passes, and that's it. You know, it's a mental experience which you had, which nobody around you had or will ever find out about, and maybe you yourself will forget about it tomorrow. Does that mean that because and if somebody they could operate on your brain and look at all the neurons firing there, would they be able to experience that memory that you had? Not right now. There's no way. The mental, much of the mental that we experience is in essentially private. At least now, there's nothing in the brain that we can point to and say that's the memory there. I can look at open up your head and see what you were thinking about or remembering. There's nothing like that. Not even close to anything like that. What that suggests to some people is there really is a mental world that is not reducible to the physical. But that's different from saying that there is something that will survive your complete, say, physical decay, like after you've been cremated, that your soul is still running around up there. That there's a difference between those two things. Monty, you have your hand up again? Go ahead.
Yeah, what's cool about science is that have we enough resources, and we actually have reporters throughout the entire hospital waiting for the rare occasion where someone wakes up and describes this, that we can say, yeah, we have a video of the room next door, and yes, there is a stuffed animal, and boy, this is interesting. We need to explore this further to see this pattern continues. But until now, we don't have such evidence, so we can only remain open-minded and says, well, most likely not, but like you said, we can't really know for sure.
Yeah.
And we talked about that the mind is not physical. Well, flame is not physical. There's material that flows through it. It burns, it momentarily lights, and flows upward out of visible range. And so we see a thing that wiggles around. So it's a flame. It's a thing, but it's not material. It's a process. Like the mind is a process. We shut off all the energy in our mind, and we become like the flame. We just flame out. There's nothing there. It's the constant continuation of our active brain, like a flame, that is a thing, until you shut all the material off. And then, if you put a person in a water tank and completely deprive them all experiences, suddenly they lose touch with reality, and the mind abhors a vacuum. Before you know it, you're imagining things that are not true. You start to have wild dreams, and just you go off the wall, and you completely depend on what few memories are still left in your mind to construct an ultimate reality. I see death as the same way. You're deprived of so much information, the mind starts to make it up in this new environment of an oxygen-deprived environment, and we wake back up and recall these vivid, strange dreams and recollections.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
My thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Monty. Although I think physicists would say that a flame is a physical thing because it's actually a chemical reaction that is pre-reducible and it's detectable by instruments and in our senses. But anyway, Josiah, you have your hand up, and after Josiah, I'm going to move on to the second part of this. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to bring up some examples that might be helpful. As an objection. I haven't really thought these through yet, so if anyone has any ideas, that'd be helpful. But yeah, so there's this company that recently was able to have communication between two sleeping people. They would, I think the company is called REM Space, and they were able to have a communication between two sleeping people. I think they have like a server running, and they were able to send some kind of messages between them. So that's one example of where like two minds can interact with each other. I think, again, I haven't really thought it through yet, but I thought that would be an interesting objection to bring up. So yeah.
Okay, I think you're, I guess, suggesting that there's something non-physical there. Although, there could be physical things going on here that, brain waves, which are real physical things that could escape the brain and pass through the air to another mind somewhere else. That would still be physical, though, if we could detect such a thing. If it's something that in theory physics could or science could detect and do so, reproduce that experience again and again, then it would become just regular science. It would just be a phenomenon that a new one that they could be subject to further scientific investigation. But unless you can reproduce these things easily, I think science is really reluctant to speculate about what that means as far as the physical world. That there are such things as mental experiences, actually almost nobody denies that. What the question is the mental ultimately reducible to the physical? That's the mind-body problem. Not that no one doubts that there's mental experiences out there. The question is, are they the same thing ultimately as a physical thing? And if so, then that would suggest that everything is physical. Or the reverse, that everything physical is actually reducible to something mental, which is where we're going to go next when we go to Barrett. I'm going to move on to the second part of this, which is Lisa Feldman Barrett, who she is and what she's doing and how this relates to the mind-body issue. Okay, Lisa Feldman Barrett, she's an academic in, I think, Boston, somewhere in the New England somewhere, I forget. She is a neuroscientist, also with a background in psychology before she became a neuroscientist. For those of you who don't quite get the difference, psychology, which precedes historically neuroscience, is largely about they're studying people's behavior, what they say, what they do, and how that connects up with the world, with life. Neuroscience is closer to biology. It's looking at what's the physical stuff going on in our brains and what that has to do with, what impact does that have to do on psychology, on our perception of the world. So it's ultimately more closer to biology than it is to psychology, although the point of neuroscience is it seems like there ought to be a connection between the two, especially if you're a physicalist, or as in fact most scientists who study or biologists are. In fact, what makes her strikingly interesting, her views striking, is that she is taking a direction that is not the standard one, but she's in a position to back up her comments because she is. She's been studying the brain, not the mind, the brain, the physical thing up here, for 30 years in her labs, and been working with many other scientists, and has written extensively about this. I think she has more citations than any other neuroscientist in the world at this time. And so when she says something about this, it may be wrong, but it's definitely at the cutting edge of studying of brain science. Okay, and what she says is this. I have to spell out an assumption she makes, which is really behind almost everything she says, and it's something to keep in mind as you try to assess whether you believe this or not. Is that, as most biologists would say, they take evolution very seriously. Everything we are capable of doing, as we are basically animals. We're not like 99% animal and 1% something else. We're 100% animal from a biological point of view. And like all the other animals on the planet, they have an evolutionary history. Life came to be the way it is it was shaped into the way things are by certain very basic evolutionary biological principles. Famously, Darwin, and it has to do with, I'll just spell out the two that she points out too, but they're very basic and they're not a strange thing to any biologist. And that is that it is survival. There are two basic forces out there that shape how life forms over time. One is a basic principle that living things want to survive. They want to continue. What does it mean to survive? It means to preserve your organization so that you can continue doing more of the same. When you fail to do that, you die. But most living things don't want to die. They want to stick around for as long as possible. So everything that they ever do, or every reaction they have to the world, is either directly or indirectly, perhaps by a long causal chain, related to that principle. Everything, no exceptions, and that's an important point. The other thing is to survive for what? She says to survive to reproduce. So number one, to survive. Second, to survive long enough to make more like yourself. And everything in life is, as far as we know it, is governed by those two core principles, which are Darwinian. And and the important part is there's no exceptions. And this is where it gets, where people, what's going to lead to her rather striking conclusions. Okay, so if that's true, and if it's true that those two principles govern everything that living things do all the time, not just sometimes, that means that the biological process has a evolutionary history that, for example, how do we, everything about reality out there, everything we call reality, has some connection with those two principles. In other words, if it ain't serving one of those two principles, it isn't real. It isn't real because why would we evolve the capacity to learn about things that have no relevance to either our survival or our survival long enough to reproduce? What's the point? It's not like, she calls it, and there's a reason, it's a biological reason, because we have she calls it metabolic, it's metabolically expensive to entertain ideas that don't relate to one of those two principles. So, for example, why do I need to believe that there's an external physical world out there if it doesn't do me any good? It doesn't serve either of those two principles. So what if it's all made up? So what if we're living in the Matrix, or there's an evil demon, or we're being deceived? If it doesn't actually affect one of those two imperatives, these biological imperatives, it makes no difference. In other words, if you're going to insist on there being an external world, external to the brain, and by the way, I'll talk about that some more, but everything, whether it's internal or external, that evolved, as far as living things are concerned, has to relate to those two principles. And this means, and just put it bluntly, that everything in the universe, and I don't mean just our biology, is what it is, and we know about it, and we form concepts about it, because at some point in our evolutionary history, having that concept was useful to our survival or to our ability. And if it doesn't, it would have been selected against. In other words, if there were people who insisted on there being an external world and they really believed it, and to the point where it made a difference in their lives, so to such an extent they would kill that other tribe over there who didn't believe it, we would not have survived a long time ago. So in other words, idle speculation about things that don't relate to one of those two things is going to be selected against evolutionarily over time. And those things which do relate or support one of those two imperatives, those are the things that get selected for. So the ideas in our head, in our mind, our brain, are what they are because they have been useful evolutionarily. And if they haven't been, they're not there. Or if ideas enter our brains that are not going to be helpful in regard to those two imperatives, they're going to be weeded out. They're going because they're consuming, literally consuming calories to think about, not things that have no bearing on your survival. And everything relates to it. Mathematics, astronomy, physics, chemistry, all of it is what it is because at some point or another it has helped us to get where we are at now. And if it didn't, luckily we have a large margin for error. That we have a little elbow room to think about things, that try out things to see if they help us, and if they do, great, we make some progress. But if they don't, and we persist in doing them, we're going to disappear because you're wasting precious energy pursuing them. So we have a budget for error, but you exceed that budget, and you're going to guarantee you and your kind are going to cease to exist. Because the resources are limited. We don't have unlimited resources of any kind. So what we have had better be useful to serve one or the other of those two ends. So to get back to the subject, what is real? In those three lectures, the first one she talks first about emotion, about the origins of emotion. She thinks that emotions are constructed. The emotions we have are literally made up by the brain, because they have served one of those imperatives, our survival or our need to reproduce more like ourselves. They don't have any reality beyond that. And secondarily, she's going to talk about mind and all the ideas, the abstractions that are in our brains. Those two are what they are because they have been useful to one of those imperatives. And then if you combine those two things, all of reality outside, in fact, the whole point between outside and inside vanishes. There's just, in the end, she's going to say there are these signals. Our brain, and I'm holding in abeyance what we mean by brain in a moment, because what she means by brain isn't necessarily what a physicalist means by brain. A physicalist would say, well, it's the stuff inside your skull. She says, no, the stuff inside your skull, too, is also implicated in this. In other words, her metaphysics is what is ultimately there. That as far when we keep on asking questions, when we get beyond the physics, what's there, what is reality? That's what metaphysics tries to answer. And her answer to that question is this: no, there isn't a mind, and there isn't a body either. Both of them are figments that were evolutionarily useful for us to develop. And to the extent they're useful, great. If you call that reality, that's reality. But it exists only in relation to those principles. That's why she calls it relational reality. So, for example, what there is in the world is, she calls them signals. What is a signal? She defines it as a quantity that varies over time. A quantity of what, you might ask? Well, you can't say until they're not real until signals interact with each other. They cross each other. When that happens, you now get an object of the real world. It could be the Andromeda galaxy. It could be your left toe on your left foot, or the second law of thermodynamics, or your best friend, or your worst enemy, or your nose, whatever. All of that is composed of signals. That's all reality. And these signals it's happening up here in the brain. Although even the phrase up here, and making a distinction between signals coming from outside and coming from inside the body, even that is made up. In other words, signals have zero meaning until they cross each other and the mind gives them meaning. And on the basis of what? Again, to serve those two principles. Things have meaning to the extent that they are conducive to your survival or reproduction. If they don't have any connection with those two things, they won't even be recognized. So the color of objects, for example, the smells, the tastes, what you see through telescopes and microscopes, all of it gets conceptualized, because conceptualizing it that way, which is this is what she means by making up shit. Your mind says, I want to make up shit about this because making up this shit helps me helps those principles. It's stuff that's made up to serve those principles. But if you're going to say there's something there beyond what serves those principles, that is what she denies. All of reality is what it is because ultimately it serves those two principles, survival and reproduction. This means that even the objects of physics, biology, even the physical brain itself, isn't real, except to the extent that it helps us to conceptualize the brain as real. That makes it real. And that applies to everything in the universe. That's why this goes beyond, okay, I'm giving her philosophical view. Now, where did she get this from? Because she's not really a philosopher, although she's dabbled a little bit in philosophy of science, but her expertise is neuroscience, brain science. Well, she spent 30 years observing and testing and running experiments in laboratories to see how the brain works. And to go back to the original lecture there about the constructing emotions, why the mind or the brain constructs emotions. It turns out that here's some experiments that I'm recalling this from memory, but I highly recommend you guys watch the videos, the lectures. But for example, to give a concrete example of the mind making stuff up, there have been many experiments, and it's been replicated many times, where you have people who are thirsty, who are drinking a glass of water, and almost every time, by the time you get to the bottom of the glass of water, you ask the person, do you feel that your thirst is quenched? Almost every time they say yes. And what her experimental results are is that their brain is saying, you made up the story about them having their thirst quenched. Okay, there's no way the brain could have direct information of that, because what the brain is doing is predicting that in the past, when you have drank a glass of water, it usually results in you're surviving a little bit longer, because otherwise you'd die of dehydration. So it's predicting that at the end of the drinking of the water in the glass, you're going to feel that your thirst is quenched. But it's literally physically impossible that any signal from the water molecules that you just consumed could have sent a message or entered your brain, because it takes 20 minutes from the time you drink a glass of water for even a single molecule of that water to reach the brain. And your internal organs don't report that. They're not interested in it. It's of no use to them to report to your brain that you're now hydrated. Now, physically, your body is hydrated, but it's not informing your brain of it. Your brain is making this up. It's saying, well, it's been very helpful to me in the past to drink water, because if I didn't, I start to feel ill or sick or even die. Therefore, I predict at the end of drinking this glass of water, I should feel thirsty, so therefore I do feel thirsty. The emotion, the sensation of being quenched is what is being made up. And the sensation of being thirsty too, because it's your brain has learned that creating these emotions, these sensations has been useful to your survival. But your brain is not getting any kind of direct information from your body that you drank that water. Your eyes are seeing, you observe, you drink the water, your brain says, oh, I'm drinking a glass of water, therefore, and by the time I get to the bottom of the glass of water, I should feel quenched. And that's the story your brain makes up. It makes that up. It wasn't informed except through the eyes, and your eyes don't drink water. Your body does not inform your brain, because the water can't get to your brain in the time frame that you feel quenched. If that was the case, you would drink the water now, and then 20 minutes or longer later, then you'd start to feel quenched. But that's not what happens. And the same thing works with almost every other experience we have. The mind is basically predicting future events based upon its past experience, but it's not directly perceiving either how it feels about things, or even ideas. Ideas are like concepts are literally made up to if it helps you to explain something for your mind to make up this shit or concept, it'll make it up. It makes up whatever story is helpful if it, helps you make it through the day, another day that you survive. And that's the full extent. And since this covers every aspect of our experience of the world, including whether there are other objects out there, whether an apple is you should eat the apple or not, or whether what you see through a telescope or a microscope or in the lab, all of it, all these observations are conditioned by past. What your brain is doing is it's confronting this information and saying, in the past, when I've experienced this, what should be my reaction that is according to that would serve one of those two cardinal imperatives. In what way does it help me survive? It may not be conscious, but that's exactly what is going on all the time. So we don't ever have any direct truck or connection with reality. We're always like like someone riding in the back of a taxi cab who tells the driver where to go, and most of the time the driver goes where you want them to go. But you aren't driving the taxi. You have an kind of an arm's length distance between whatever it is that's actually making things happen, and you're kind of like noticing, well, I'm going where I wanted to go, so good, I'll keep doing this. And that pattern just is nonstop. Our brain is doing that every moment of our waking lives, and maybe even when we're asleep. And this is true for animals, for people, and it explains why we're here. Because if at any point in this we start making mistakes about our predictions, our brain, it's going to cost us. Maybe we have a little budget for making some mistakes, but let's say you do something and something unexpected happens, something that your mind has no memory of. This is new. What happens then, she says, is you have what she calls a technical term, a learning experience. You look at this new experience and you say, well, your mind tries to fit it into something you've experienced in the past. What is this? I've never experienced this before, but what is it like? What is it most like? And it creates a model and says, well, maybe it's like this. And you run with that idea for a while. And if it doesn't work, it goes back to the drawing board and tries to find some other past experience that better mirrors or explains what you're experiencing. Fortunately, the very fact we're here means that our brains are pretty good at that, because we're able to at least have not necessarily an accurate picture of reality, but a picture of reality that serves those purposes, that is good enough to help us survive from one day to the next. But that good enough understanding of the world is no direct connection with reality. It's whatever the mind makes up as it goes that has a track record of helping you to survive. And that is, in a nutshell, her whole view of the mind-body thing. And this, and I said, because nothing gets into your mind or brain. It doesn't even matter whether you call it mind or brain anymore, because even the brain itself is in the same. There is no physical reality out there that you have direct connection with. Everything you have, you know about it, is these signals coming in, which get interpreted a certain way. They're given meaning by the brain based upon whether or not it serves those two imperatives. And this is not just signals coming from outside the world, but from the inside of your body, like sensations of pain or pleasure, or any discomfort or comfort you feel from inside your body. That's signals that actually have zero meaning until they get interpreted in light of one of those two principles. So this means that external signals or internal signals have zero meaning. They get whatever meaning they get because the brain has decided that it's helpful to have this, to give it this interpretation, because it helps you survive or reproduce. And this is true for living things. And we have no way, somebody's got their mic on, hear a dog bark. Anyway, okay, I'm going to pause here and we can discuss this, and then because there are some major questions and objections to this view, which after we talk about a little bit about it, I'm going to play some clips of her. Hopefully, I can get it to work on this machine. Just small clips from the long 6-hour lectures that I posted, where someone challenges her on this theory, and she responds, and I think her responses are very interesting. But before we get to that, those would be kind of like objections. I've tried to explain this. I'm not. You really ought to listen to her lectures if you want to hear her. But do any of you have any questions or comments at this point? Okay, go ahead, Monty, and then Jairo.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with her description of reality, and I have almost no qualm except for there are things that were necessary in the past for us, and that's why we sense certain things. But sometimes today we may not have use for that anymore, but it doesn't end us to have that which is no longer necessary, like the idea of beauty and sunset and colors, when all it was is help us to identify red fruit when it's ripe, that it somehow extends to us loving rainbows. But that's an offshoot from the initial thing. You need to see color to know what fruit is ripe and not ripe. And then also our minds can misfire. Sometimes, we'll have a deja vu experience, or we swear it's deja vu, but we have a module called deja vu that was accidentally fired. But we insist that our experience that we had it before when we had never had it before. But it doesn't matter. Once that emotional module deja vu is fired in our brain and we feel it, we insist it's real. We insist we had the experience before, even if we never have. So even the mind can misfire, but apparently it's not critical to our survival. If it was, we would no longer have those misfires. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Monty. Jairo, am I pronouncing your name right? Or is it Jairo? Anyway, go ahead.
You can call me Jay. You can call me Ray.
Okay, all right.
Whatever you like. But yeah, Jairo is good. But technically, Jairo is the Spanish way of saying it from Colombia.
Jairo. Yeah.
Yes, I like Lisa Feldman Barrett. I haven't watched the videos, and I look forward to watching them. Because I know her by way of what she did with emotions. And so I can imagine what she's trying to say, and I may be wrong, but it could be similar to what Donald Hoffman, is that the name, is saying, that we through evolution we create sort of like a desktop, and we have icons of things that are out there, and so we simplify what's out there, like through our eyes or whatever, and what's useful for us is good enough. We don't want to waste too much energy and trying to what we see be perfect. We kind of what is it called, like render, or when you have certain amount of data and you kind of smooth it out, so that what we see out there is just good enough for what we need for survival. Yes, I'm looking forward to listening to her. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jairo. Yeah, you mentioned Donald Hoffman. There are other people out there who have used that are similar to this, but what makes yours interesting, at least from my perspective, is that they arose, if you listen to the lectures, you can hear from her empirical research, from studying actually in the lab how the brain works. It's not armchair speculation like a lot of philosophers do. It's actual empirical work over 30 years, and it's led her to these conclusions about mind and body or the brain. And it's not by any means, as she will admit herself, the mainstream in neuroscience to her views, but she's holding her own against a lot of criticism. But that's how science progresses. Whether she's ultimately right or not, I don't know. But I do think that her views are internally coherent, especially when you listen to the lectures. You see where she comes to this conclusion. She doesn't just come to it. Not like like maybe Descartes just sitting in a chair and speculating. But anyway, it's go ahead, Mike. Mike.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it sounds like a perfectly reasonable theory to me. I hear elements of Kantianism here, that there's this boundary beyond which we can't go.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit Nietzschean to me, where we can't live without the constant falsification of reality. But I think, okay, the Achilles heel of this, there is one. Maybe this is coming up in the video. Is that, okay, isn't her theory itself based upon the need for survival and reproduction? And if that's true, that truth kind of disappears in here somewhere. I mean, I don't see how you get, because, okay, so if everything we regard as, if everything that happens, or experiences, is filtered through this survival and reproduction filter, then it seems like truth gets watered down. And how do we know that her theory is true if it came through this filter?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. In fact, it's going to be in one of the videos the clips that I'm going to show in a moment. Somebody asked a question like that. They asked the question: isn't her view, the way she intends it, she does mean all of reality. She doesn't mean just part of it. Well, does that mean that her own view is subject to the same unreality? Is it? In other words, if nothing is real, then her theory isn't real either, right? And she has a response to that. But anyway, that's a great question because it's an important, it's a natural question. DLJ, go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Yes, I'm also in the pro camp. Thank you for the videos. I hadn't seen that before, or indeed heard of it. I liked it because she agrees with me. Anybody who agrees with me is good. As far as it goes, I want to question though, she's been obviously put in the idealist camp, but it's presented very much as physicalist. She's saying the brain. I mean, she's not denying the.
Actually, she denies
the horseshoe. You know the horseshoe idea where the left becomes the right becomes the left. So it's almost like she's so physicalist that it's become idealist.
Yeah. There's something paradoxical about her view. She's coming from an empiricist, scientific, very physicalist. She studies the brain, you know. We all think of it as a physical, not the mind, but the brain. She was trained as a psychologist too, but now she's studying the brain. And her view seems to come. She denies being an idealist, and I think I have an idea why, but it does resemble idealism to me in some ways. I think the reason why she kind of shies away from using idealism, and instead she coins this term called relational realism. Yeah, she wants to be a realist, not she's not denying that there's a reality. She insists. She's just saying what reality is, and it may not be a physicalist understanding of reality, which sounds like it's a little paradoxical, but. Anyway, did I interrupted you? But anybody, did you want to say more, DLJ, or?
I was going to, but it's gone.
Okay. Well,
the signals have been interfered with, so the reality has changed.
All right. If it occurs to you, go ahead and let me know. Anybody else on this about this? Okay. Okay, I'm going to try something. Hopefully this works. Let's see, what did I do?
Can I ask whether you read the book? Because in the third lecture, she was saying that she's only going to spend an hour on it, and that's nowhere near enough because there's a lot more to it. So I was thinking at the end of it, okay, that was good as far as it went. It kind of told us how the operating system worked, but not the management or the governance system worked. So, so I wonder whether she's written more that goes that far.
But does what?
Probably yes, I'm guessing.
I'm not sure.
Well, she said in her third lecture, which, by the way, the comments were turned off. I thought that was kind of curious. Obviously, she'd had a lot of pushback on that one.
Yeah.
But she was saying that she can't only do so much within the 1 hour lecture, and there's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
So I presume there's a book somewhere with a lot more in it. Right?
Oh yeah, yeah. She's quite prolific. I mean, she's written several books and like many articles. There is in the extended write-up that I put up there, which you can click on at the bottom of the description at Meetup. It goes to a PDF which has more detail, including more resources. And there's a paper that she wrote that you can, a free one, a PDF that you can download, which explains, especially in the constructing emotions part of it. And you can find other stuff by here on the internet as well. But yeah, the extended write-up has more references if you want to pursue this further, as well as some of my commentary on what she says.
Oh, nice, nice. When I signed up, it said further information to follow, so yes.
Well, at the bottom of the description at the meetup, it says full write-up in progress or something like that. Click that. It takes you to a PDF. And actually, I'm not sure that I was totally finished with it, but there's enough there to give people enough to think about and resources to pursue if you want. Okay. I want to play some clips from the Q&A part of her lectures because I think they really are intriguing. One is a challenge from a philosopher of perception about, and he's not kind of sympathetic with her, but he also thinks that he's raising the obvious questions that many people, especially people coming from the sciences, the conventional sciences, physics, for example, would have about her view. And that's one clip. And the other one is to do with the circularity thing that Mike brought up about how what if you apply her theory to her theory? What do you get? That her theory is not real either because nothing is, And then finally, there's a shorter video clip about someone who asked about what can you use her insight into doing something to. If we're making up reality as we go, can we do it better? And she has some interesting things to say about that. Okay, I'm going to try to share the screen to play this video, and I hope it doesn't tax the system too much. If not, I'll have to come back and sort of just explain what she says, but I think it's best to hear her say this. So stay here for a moment. I'm going to try to window our screen.
Hi. No. Hi, Lisa.
Where are you?
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Are you guys still there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see the video.
And you can see the video. Okay, here goes.
Yes.
Thanks for this. This is great. I'm a philosopher of perception, so I've got lots of things I could ask about. But I thought I'd kind of. I guess my question is really kind of what we're left with, what the big picture is here. So, and in particular, I suppose whether relational reality is on your view the only reality. And I suppose the question. So what we have is we start with signals, right? We have these signals. Now you can imagine a world in which evolution worked a little bit differently and brains never existed, but the signals would still be there, right? So that looks like there's there's something to talk about there, some kind of reality, which is, I suppose you could say, the kind of reality which physics is interested in, right? Physics is interested in looking at the world from from the view from nowhere, from some kind of perspective which isn't actually inhabited by somebody.
Yeah, so I would say go have a look at The Blind Spot by Evan Thompson and Marcella Glaser, and I can't remember the Alan somebody. There's a third physicist. What they talk about really beautifully is that this view from nowhere is a complete abstraction simplification, that it isn't real. And in fact, not only, I mean, I will say, if you haven't read Nancy Cartwright, you should, because she talks a lot about, like, for example, scientific laws are fictions. They are fictions that we create so that they're general, right? The periodic table, a fiction. You can't actually use the periodic table, so you have to add detail back in context. So my point to you is that, yeah, physicists create abstractions, but I would say those abstractions are not real. They are fictions by design, they're simplifications by design, so that we can make generalizations. But that doesn't make them real. So I think, Carlo Rovelli, I probably cite him most because I think I understand him. I mean, I've been trying to understand physics since 12th grade. Like, I just inherently don't get it. But he kind of makes sense to me. One of the things he said, which really resonated to me when he was explaining Schrodinger's, the Schrodinger cat paradox, is, like, why would the world care that there's an observer? Like, why would nature care? And the answer is nature doesn't care. It's the way that we're asking the question that's the problem. So do I admit that there are signal interactions out there that we can't detect? Maybe, yeah. In principle, sure. But is that part of reality for a human? Not until you detect it. Not until there's some way for you to interact with it. And, of course, one way to think about science is the goal is to try to expand reality as opposed to understand reality. So sometimes when people, like the other day, somebody asked me, well, the brain has to, construct a three-dimensional world. And I was like, no, the brain doesn't have to do that. It does that. And that works for us. But evolution didn't require that that's the way it works. We have certain sensory surfaces, and this is the solution that, evolution delivered. But in principle, it could have delivered others. It just didn't. So that doesn't mean that those are necessary, that there's some necessary requirement there to perceive things in a particular way because they're real out there without us. I don't know if this is making any sense.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it is. I think it's a big move to move from talking about reality to talking about reality for humans or reality for a perspective.
Well, one of the really interesting things, I'm not going to lay claim to this because, for me, this is a philosophy of science ultimately. For me, this whole journey, I was trying to figure out, honestly, why would scientists who have particular goals to understand how the world is continue to use methods that we've known for 40 years are flawed and substantially flawed and artifactually construct results? Like, why would that happen? And the answer can't be because they're careerist or whatever. Like, I thought there has to be something else at stake here. So for me, it was trying to figure out really my journey as a scientist for 30 years. I feel like I've been swimming against the stream, and I want to understand why. But in this book, The Blind Spot, they're making a very, very important set of claims. They're saying that believing in the abstraction, that the idea that there's a God's eye view or a view from nowhere, actually has led to very serious problems, not only in the way that science is conducted and used, but in our relationship with the Earth. So they're making very strong claims about climate change and about, like, if you view reality, you view the world as not inherently related to you, but just out there for your purposes to manipulate objectively, that leads you to it has led to a whole set of consequences that now we have to grapple with. So I'm saying you should go have a look at that work, because to me, that was a set of consequences I had never actually considered before. Which, to me, it makes a lot of sense, and I think they've argued it really beautifully, but you'll have to see what you think. Can I just also say something about your question? I just want to go back to your question. Sorry, sir, yeah, I just wanted to say one thing I was thinking about. I'm actually deeply uncomfortable with the idea that reality is, I mean, I have moments where I really struggle with myself and say, is this really what I want to say? Do I really want to say this? So I just wanted to sort of add that it's not like I'm blithely going along and saying, you know, I think I think of it as the natural extension of what I'm saying scientifically, but I'm not like 100% sure, and I'm sort of, it feels like wrong in a way. Scientists aren't supposed to talk like that. So I just wanted to add that piece. Like, I'm not blithely disregarding everything that everybody says. I just keep trying to poke holes both in my own. I don't want to be inconsistent with myself unless I mean deliberately to contradict something that I've said before. And I think that this view is consistent with what I've said so far, but I'm not completely copacetic with it, if you understand me. I just, not that that's relevant, but I just wanted to share that with you. Yeah.
Can you guys see? Do you guys see that? Did it work? Are you still there?
Yeah.
Yes, we saw it.
Okay. Basically, she was asked to, you know, there is this view, at least in one philosophy of science, that there is such a thing as an objective view from nowhere. That there is a physics, conventional physics thinks that there is a reality out there that would be there even if we had never existed, and that's theoretically what a lot of physicists and scientists in general believe they study, and that seems to be what she's questioning here. Does anybody have any reaction to this before I go to the next one, or any thoughts about it? Okay, I'm going to do another video. This one is somebody asked her, what did they ask? They asked, about the circularity of her theory. Well, if her theory is right, then even her own theory isn't reflecting reality, but it's some sort of abstraction or something that is not, that there's conditioned by her own principles, that it's about survival. In other words, science is not really trying to understand the real world. It's trying to understand the world that in some form or other is helping us make it through the day and through our lives, or our offspring to continue on. That's what science is in the business of doing. But that doesn't sound like, if you ask most scientists or empiricists, people who study the world, that's what they're really doing. It doesn't seem right. It seems like there's you can say, I'm trying to understand the world without necessarily thinking in terms of my survival or the survival of anything or whatever. But anyway, so I'm going to play this next clip and see, because she's responding to that thing as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again.
So what happens if you apply your theory to your own theory?
You guys hear that? Can you all hear that? Are you still there? Can you? Are you still there? Oh, I think I hope. Oops.
So what happens if you apply your theory to your own theory? So it seems like there seems to be a traditional or objective reality about the brain function.
Are you guys? Can you still hear me? You still there? Looks like we lost our connection. Okay, are you guys still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like I got. Anyway, it crashed. I'm going to try to do it again. Okay.
Maybe you should get it started and then start sharing.
All right.
Rather than.
All right. I'll do that.
So what happens if you apply your theory to...
We hear it. We don't see the video, but we can hear her.
Okay, I want to try to do the screen sharing. Now.
Sounds good enough, though. We don't really need to do it. Some of us remember radio, how it works.
Can you guys
There
hear
we go.
this?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay.
your own theory. So it seems like, so what happens if you apply your theory to your own theory? So it seems like there seems to be a traditional or objective reality about the brain functions, like how we construct our concepts, like category creation, how they're bull signals, or how they're like anatomical features of our brain, or how you discover data from like billions of papers. It seems like you're discovering something objective. Then
well, I would never say that, but sure.
Yeah, and then one of the implications I thought is that your theory might be called a neurotypical theory of emotions and mind and reality, because even though you might observe the brains from neurodiverse people, I feel like the scientists could be the majority of people are neurotypical, therefore the theory could be produced by neurotypical people and it could be called a neurotypical theory of emotions, mind, and reality. So like another way of putting it is, so if the scientists were neurodivergent, do you think the reality that you observed from the data could have been different?
Well, sure. I mean, I could give you a completely different spin on the experiments that I talked about. I mean, I want to say a couple of things. One is that there is a necessary, there's a necessary sort of dependence I can't avoid, which is that I'm using evidence that is theory laden to, like all experiments are theory laden. So I'm using theory laden experiments that create evidence to create observations, and then I'm inferring something from them. There's a circularity there I can't escape. No scientist can escape. But what a scientist can do is be aware of the fact that the experiments are theory-laden. And they can actually use a different theory that would make very different assumptions to try create observations. Like, what is an experiment? An experiment is just you're creating experiences for yourself as a scientist that you're going to compare against your hypotheses. So I think there is a way to be careful about it. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that when I first started retraining as a neuroscientist, one of the things that really confused me was when you look at the brain, like, how do you know if one neuron is synapsing on another neuron? How do you know? Are they part of the same circuit? Is it one circuit modulating another circuit? Like, where are the lines? Like, how do you know? And the answer is you don't. You never know. The scientist decides what's inside the system and what's an input to the system and what's an output to the system. So I could decide that the cerebral cortex is a system. I could decide the whole brain is a system. I could decide the whole nervous system is a system. I could decide you and I right now are a system. I could decide we're all... The point is that this is called scientific pluralism, right? That you can use different perspectives to constrain the meaning of your data or interpret the meaning of your data. And there's a really interesting kind of argument from feminist philosophers who are arguing for something called standpoint philosophy, which is to say, in science, there is no objective fact. What stands in for objectivity is consensus. Consensus among scientists who are diverse in their backgrounds, diverse in their assumptions, and they exist in a self-questioning, self-critical community. So I would say that is, in terms of a philosophy of science, or in terms of the philosophy of doing science, that's sort of how we do it. That's how I do it in my lab. That's how we do it. Do I think that a neurotypical scientist would come up with the same ideas as or the same interpretation? I don't think most scientists agree with this interpretation. And I would say that probably neurodiverse scientists probably would have diverse interpretations too. Like, I don't think you could talk about what the average neurodiverse scientist would do because people are different. But I think what I can tell you is I've had lots of emails from lots of neurodiverse people who feel like this makes a lot of sense to them. And actually they feel validated by it. They're not scientists, at least they don't describe themselves to me that way. What they describe is feeling understood. Because inherently, I mean, I keep hammering away at neurotypicality because that's what that's a sort of, there's a set of assumptions being made that nobody's really talking about. The one last thing I'll say is that even neurotypicality is an abstraction that is not real. It's a simplification. Actually, every person's brain is slightly different. Like, the plan is very similar. In fact, the plan for all mammals is very similar. It's even similar amongst many vertebrates. But the details, the devil is in the details. And one of the things our lab is known for is attempting to study individual people over time in a deep way, and not study fictions like abstractions, like averages of people, which I did for many, many years because that's what I was required to do. So I totally hear you, and I agree with what you're saying in general principles, but I do think that you can't get away from the circularity, but you can be mindful of it, and you can also use pluralistic approaches to your benefit as a scientist. I think that's my opinion. Anyways.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Good. Do you have any reactions to that, or?
Well, as a neurodiverse person, I'm going to say, yes, nice. I got the same feeling of, oh, yeah, somebody understands.
Okay.
So, I can certainly empathise with those people who've written to them. Yeah.
Okay. Monty, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I see your point. I see the questioner's point that that it's all made up stuff, even what she says made up stuff. But the question is it useful? And that's where, you know, we come in. Is can we make additional predictions and see if it comes true? Can we turn it to a technology? Then it justifies, you know, we as survival machines say, yes, this is useful because now we're doing real work with this knowledge. But a lot of those theories aren't doing work for us, so we can all honestly be suspicious of, well, it's just an idea, it's just made up. It might be true, might not be true, but it's irrelevant until it becomes useful to us as survival machines. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Monty. I think there are at least two understandings or definitions that I'm aware of, maybe there's more, of what we mean by reality. To some people, reality is that which you have to deal with, contend with, that you can't ignore or you will suffer if you do. That's the practical, pragmatic reality, and I think that's the reality that she's focused on. There's another understanding of reality, which is, I think it's still deep-seated in many people, and that's the idea that reality is that which is there, and it would be there even if we weren't here to experience it. There is something there, and before, I mean, what she's saying is that, I mean, think of science, which says, you know, 66 million years ago, the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid, which struck here not too far from where I'm at in Mexico. That's one theory. There's another theory that says, no, it was a huge, massive geothermal event that happened in India, where something like a volcano, but a volcano like with a mouth the size of the state of Washington, which created a messed with the atmosphere of the whole planet. And that also happened 66 million years ago. Either one of these two things could have killed off the dinosaurs and many other things besides. But it does seem like when that there was a reality there back then, when 66 million years ago, which these dinosaurs experienced. We weren't around then. Isn't that real? I think I understand why people want to say there is a reality out there, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with us. We're just here observing it, experiencing a tiny part of it, but there's much more there besides that which we can experience. That's the realist perspective, and what she's arguing against is against that view, and that's pretty counterintuitive, I think. Go ahead, Monty.
Another point I thought was interesting is, you know, the idea of that a personal observer versus an objective reality is, and then it's said as a consensus of scientists, neurotypical, aneurotypical, and I realized, you know, that's always been true because I think objective reality is a fiction in our mind. It may or may not be true, but the closest we can get to objective reality is multiple subjective views, and the more that's included in the multiple subjective views, maybe the closer it can get to the idea of an objective reality, but we're never really in touch with that concept. And just off the aside, has nothing to do with this conversation, the two events you mentioned about are actually correlated, because where the asteroid impacted, if you go 180 degrees around to where all the continents were during continental drift, that's in the exact opposite side of the Earth. That would ricochet with all the echoes of the seismic waves, will all amplify the opposite 180 degrees side of the world, and would create volcanism. It would crack up the crust. And so you can have both happen.
Yeah, thanks, Monty. In fact,
Mars.
Go ahead.
Mars happened too, the same place where you have that huge indent. The Helena Valley was deeply large impression on Mars. On the opposite side is where all those volcanoes are located. So they're both related to each other.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Monty. I didn't want to get into that, but I had the same thought too, and I think, I've heard that too. That it's also highly coincidental. These two massive, major upheavals happen so close in time to each other. How could they not be related to each other? Yeah. Anyway, but that is science. Jairo, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. And at the end, she says something. I have to paraphrase, but she says something like that. She that after explaining about experiments that you kind of design them. You kind of want to have an objective to get at. So she says you can make them to your advantage. Like you could devise an experiment possibly to get the data that you want to get. Couldn't you?
Yeah, I mean,
yes, that's what you said.
Yeah. Yeah, although you have to be careful because then, I mean, to say there's no objective or no view from nowhere perspective is not the same as saying you can do whatever you want and come up with any data you want. As she said, that what you can do is it's more intersubjective, that is requiring, as I think Monty or somebody said, multiple subjective perspectives and sort of trying to get some insight from all of them and trying to come to some consensus, because consensus is all you have. And that consensus could change with new information.
But what is causing that consensus? It's her and her boss, her colleagues.
Well, we hope it's not. We hope it's not like a motivated consensus where somebody with a lot of money wants to certain results and is sponsoring certain scientific research to get those results. But assuming that, leaving that aside, what's caused in the ideal world, the consensus would be because multiple people coming from different backgrounds with different assumptions look at the same thing, and they may not agree about everything, but they do agree about some things, and about those things they agree about, that's the state of the art as far as science goes. It might change tomorrow, but that's as good as it gets.
But then if they agree on something, they have a premise that they agree on, then how will that advance science? Because they would design the experiment, they would have confirmation bias. They kind of head that they want this experiment to confirm what they already know. So how can science progress in that way because of consensus?
Yeah, good. Well, I think that her ultimate answer there would be back to those two evolutionary principles. If there's a consensus among people who are supposed to know these things, and it isn't conducive to survival or to reproduction, it's going to fall by it's going to be dumped sooner or later. So that's the ultimate test for whether something has genuine knowledge value. Does it serve one of those two purposes? And it may for a while then stop, in which case we need to go back to the drawing board. So I think that would be her standard right there. I forget, Monty or Mike? Who was
I don't know who was first, but
go ahead.
Not only is a consensus within the same scientific field, but as an example of evolution, you have a consensus of geology, astronomy, physics. And the thing is these are entirely different disciplines that say, yeah, the thing that evolution describes fits in our for what we've noticed too. So what happens when you have different sciences falling and getting consensus to the idea of biology and evolution, then it just seems more plausible. And also there's another evolutionary survival thing. It's not only human beings that are surviving, ideas have to survive. So we have we create conditions in which it has to pass several tests before it gets to decide, just as life, that if the environment changes, then of course the species has to evolve to that new environment. And so we can have the environment of the mind, the environment of the sciences, that we set up as gatekeepers to say what ideas survive when you go through it. So these ideas go through a survival strategy separate from human beings, but then we're an extension of ideas. So thank you. It gets confusing after that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think she would say the ideas survive because they serve one of those two biological imperatives. The ideas that don't serve them are not going to survive. That's the bottom line, is in her view, I think. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying close enough attention to the last 5 or 10 minutes of discussion. But, you know, I was thinking that when I went to Central, I took rationalism and empiricism. And today's session really reminds me of that. I mean, we talked about Descartes, who was a rationalist, and that if you believe something that was true and you could keep extrapolating from those reasons using sound principles, you get to the truth. You just looking at it, I mean, I'm looking at what Descartes came up with, and it seems like he got too far away from truth to me. But then, you know, what's her name, Victor? I forgot.
Barrett.
Yeah. She strikes me as an empiricist. I mean, she's. We can already put a great deal of value on our senses, and a couple of basic drives. And these are, but in the same way, she loses truth too, or the possibility of truth. So it seems like in philosophy, we're always trying to find out what's true. What are the boundaries? What can we actually believe? And I mean, this is a great discussion, but we're not going to find the answers in our lifetime. I'm starting to think. Because I was, like 20 then, and I'm 60 now.
Yeah.
It's same questions. So to me, this is just a roll-up, my point. It's kind of an old-fashioned rationalism versus empiricism.
Yeah. I think you're right. But what's interesting about this is that she's trained as an empiricist, right? She's a scientist, a neuroscientist, who studies the brain. But her final conclusion seems to be not empiricist, but she's performing two things. In the first two lectures, she's describing to you what the state of the art is in neuroscience about emotion and ideas, and that is mostly scientific, empiricist. This last lecture, the third one, where she talks about her philosophy, she switches gears from science to philosophy, and she admits she's doing philosophy now. This relational realism view, that's a philosophy, not exactly. That goes above and beyond what the pure science allows. But it's a picture of the world that, as she says, is consistent with or best captures the results she's seeing through the empirical research, through the mind, studying the emotions and concepts of the mind. And so that is an extrapolation, a philosophical one, of the empirical background that she has. And it does sound to me, her bottom line sounds like idealist to me. It sounds very close to Berkeley. It's not the same, because Berkeley thought they had a firm conviction. There is just mind. There's no physical world, because the mind is all we ever have contact with. She's agnostic about. She says not even the mind, in a way, is real to her. There's just signals, these which don't even have meaning until the brain gives them meaning, and it gives them meaning based upon these biological evolutionary principles that are all about surviving, and either as an individual or as a species. And that's her bottom line. It's in a way Darwin-inspired view of the matter. And we can't get beyond that, because everything we've ever seen or ever do has some connection with that bottom line. If it doesn't, we would have we would have disappeared a long time ago. The proof is that the proof of her. It sounds a little circular, but in a way, her proof that she's right is the fact we're here. Because if we could abstract ourselves completely away from serving one of those two principles, we would have died out a long time ago. That's her view. Monty, go ahead.
Yeah, speaking of that and survival, it seems like humanity's put to the ultimate test that most of sciences seem to have no positive or negative results, and we just tolerate it, we put money on it. But then where the sciences are quite useful, such as climate change and the science behind climate, and it's abundantly clear if there's a serious issue, humans are causing it, suddenly we're showing how inadequate we are to respond appropriately. To realize it's a real crisis, and we'd rather call that science bad or that they're not real scientists. Anytime that we're stuck in a way of behavior that feels threatened, that we have to change. Suddenly we decide the science is not real, but yet it can do us in if we don't recognize it as a real, genuine threat to humanity and life.
Yeah.
And so now we have to go to hardcore evolution. It says, okay, the brain can't model properly, so the brain goes extinct and replaced with something else, with a new environment, new species, as most mammals go extinct after we change the world significantly. So we're not passing the test. I can see the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Okay, I want to play one last clip. It's shorter than the other two, and then we'll talk about that, and then we'll be done. So I'm going to go try to start it up and then share the screen.
Hey, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Much for this thing over here.
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I found this very engaging, and I really liked what you said about this. We cannot make anything up and make it real, but we can make a lot of shit real. So in light of this, I'm wondering if you could say something about how we can go about to construct a reality that is serving to us, both individually and collectively, and how can we do that to the best of our abilities?
Well, that's not a scientist's question. So you're asking me, well, okay, so I'll just say a couple of things. One is that I think what this whole journey has taught me, and I'm not like finished with the journey, right? I'm still on it, and if I talk to you in 10 years from now, if I'm still alive in 10 years, I don't even know that I'm going to say the same thing, right? Like when I talk about emotion now, I'm not saying the same thing as I said 25 years ago. That's why you have to read things in historical context, right? But I think it's taught me a couple of things. One is to be curious instead of being confident. This is very hard, actually. Scientists are supposed to be curious, but curiosity is, I don't think I'm the only one who, sometimes struggles with being curious when something violates a deeply held belief. But I think that it is reasonable. I actually find it easier in science than I do with my daughter, I'll just say, right? When she was a teenager, it was really hard to actually, perspective take, put myself in her shoes. It sounds trite, but I actually think it's something people don't do very often. Maybe some people do it more than others, but I think everybody struggles with it. And I think it is possible in life and also in science that more than one theoretical framework can work productively, right? But mostly I would say to be curious and to remember that, so if you and I are friends, let's say, and we're having coffee and I say to you, well, I was so anxious at the beginning of that talk, and you say, no, you weren't. You were argumentative. Who's right? That's not an answerable question, because the reality is I experienced things one way and you experienced them a different way, and that's what's real right there, and that's what we have to work from. If you do that, you probably won't get divorced, and you probably keep your friends for a really long time, right? You're not always asking who's right, who's right, who's right. I think the other thing I'll say is that, and this is really going out on a limb, I'm already out there, so why not pile on a little bit more? Prediction error, things we don't expect, that we have to learn, that's an added metabolic expense. So if you're already encumbered metabolically by tremendous uncertainty in your life because of economic uncertainty or because of climate change, or if you live in the United States, you never know when the next school shooting is going to be,
or because of climate change, there are slight increases in carbon dioxide levels, which actually make it harder for your brain to regulate your body, or because you haven't slept enough or whatever, you're more likely, automatically to look for ways to cut costs. And one way to cut costs is to only expose yourself to people who are like-minded, who are like you, who think like you. If you make yourself predictable to them, they're really predictable to you, and everybody benefits metabolically. But there's a problem with that, and that is that then you come to believe the hidden condition, right? You come to believe that consensus is objective. It tells you something objective instead of just that it's a consensus. So those are some of the ways I actually use these ideas in my life as a scientist and as a mother. Although I think if you talk to my daughter, she might say, "Yeah, now maybe, but not when she was 16."
Okay. Can you guys are still there? Everybody's
Yes.
Okay. That's her final one of her final responses. But yeah, I think she said the part about consensus and reality. What makes, I think, people the mistake can happen is when you start to believe that consensus is reality, and if we're under stress, things that cause us stress will make us make that jump from consensus to reality more easily. When if we were in better shape mentally, we could keep in mind that this is just a consensus. It doesn't mean it necessarily reflects any kind of reality we can have either now or even in the future. But anyway, Monty, go. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I love what you said. I liked your example of consensus, and that you get a false consensus if you the word escapes you, but basically where you look people to validate your own opinions, validate your own views, and then you get a number of people, then you get the false illusion now your new consensus is the truth. When we know that in order for a consensus to get closer to objective realities, you have to reach the opposite aisle. You have to get a consensus among all, even those that are difficult to work with. And that's more of a true consensus, but American politics today, we're doing just the opposite. We're developing a very bubble consensus, and we're all disagreeing with each other.
Yeah.
Instead of saying no. That's where I don't subscribe to magazines that sing my tune, because that just gets me more into my own bubble, and I'd rather reach out to other journals that make me think and rethink my position. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Monty. I think that'll be it for this meetup, unless someone else has a final comment or something.
Was there a third section?
Third section, the third video, you mean? No, that was the third video.
Yeah, well, no. I mean, because it seemed like that there was 3 things we could do, and she was number 2, so there isn't a third thing then.
No, the topic, the third part of the topic, right. You mean? No, yeah. That was the discussion, I guess, was the third part.
Okay.
That I had in mind.
Okay.
So that's basically I ran across her videos, her lectures, and there are other people, other neuroscientists out there who are saying things that seem close to what she's saying, though not exactly. I think what she did that I thought was impressive is related to some. Well, she went beyond the science. First of all, she has a scientific background, which is refreshing sometimes when you, instead of listening to philosophers armchair their way to conclusions. Not that you can avoid that, and she does herself go beyond the science toward the end. This relational realism, because another scientist might just say, "Hey, okay, this is what you discovered in the lab, and great, and it may be useful." But why speculate about reality? That's not something that scientists are really trained or in the business of doing. Except that there are scientists who are both scientists and philosophers, and she may be edging in that direction. But anyway, so that's...
No, I love that. That was beautiful. One thing I threw in there that she said, I thought of my own as an experiment, is we're scientists are so dogged looking for the ultimate theory for everything or ultimate formula. And maybe that's misguided, because as an example, someone can, as a contractor, says to programmers, to 3 contractors, make a program that does this, that solves this kind of a problem. And so they independently do, and they're all, and when they look at the programs, these 3 people, they're different as night and day, and yet they come up with the same answer. And if you really want to split the details of, well, this one's a bigger program, it's surprising, even though it is a bigger one, because of parallel computing, it comes up with answers quicker. But this other one is a very small program, so we don't need as much hardware to run it, so it's economical, but it's a little slower. And then so you can say, well, you can split it, but then which program is correct? Which program has the theory of the universe? Well, neither of them do. There's multiple stories that can come up with the same answers, and so we should get so hung up and try to find one unified theory of things.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that idea.
Yeah. Thanks, Marty. Anybody else have any final comments?
Make sure to vote if you're an American.
Okay.
Oh yes, very consequential. Just a reminder, this is the last time you'll ever have to vote again. I say that in jest.
Yeah, we did a whole series on politics last year. We'll see everybody on the other side of this, I hope.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm with you.
But can we have a consensus when we vote? No, we're divided.
Yeah.
Well, it's just, to me, I just hope it stays in the same. I don't care whether the consensus, just make it a sane conclusion.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see if we're still around next month. Or see whatever.
God, I hope.
Or maybe there'll be a civil war. You never know.
I hope not. That is not the answer.
My great grandfather went that one. Okay, see you guys later.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye.